Today's talk is about introduction to web development using Python and Flask. We intend to develop and deploy simple web app in Python. Okay, I assume people in the room know Python, right? Is there anyone that doesn't know Python? It's fine. So this talk is very beginner oriented, as we mentioned in Luma, in the Luma page. So if you know already about backend and web development, it might be very boring to you. Just saying. We intended this talk to be very beginner oriented for those who don't know anything to get started in making a simple API. And then we also provide a roadmap in the end to know where to go later. So before we get in, I'm Parsa, a PhD student at EPFL in the ICS school. And this is play. So again, saying it's for beginners. When you want to develop an API, basically any interface for your application that you can use the concepts that we learned here. For example, if you want to develop a mobile app, or if you want to develop a website, that anything that connects with a server and sends data and, back and forth to a server or anything like that, you can use the concept that we learned today. Today, we learned to deploy Python code as a service from ground up. We don't use many frameworks, basically for educational purposes. We usually we want to today do it from ground up. So you learn the very, very basic concepts. And in the process, we will build a very simple to-do app from scratch. And also we see some concepts together, such as how to save your notes in a database and very, very basic subjects in backend web development. The goal is not to have a finished product today, but to learn the building blocks and then provide a roadmap so that you can continue and basically from whatever you learned in this workshop, then you can continue onto the progress of being a professional backend developer. So first of all, how many of you have done web development in the past? Okay, some of you. Okay, for those of you, I think it would get boring. I hope it's not. But as I said, this is a very beginner-oriented. But you can have the pizza in the end, so it's fine anyways. And install an app so that you can test the APIs if you want to get along with the workshop. For example, you can install Postman or Bruno or any other app like this. Maybe if you don't know those apps, you can just install Postman if you haven't. It's a very simple download. You can just go to their website, Postman, and download the app and install them on your laptop. We use this app to communicate with our server during the workshop if you want to code along. And also, we might need an OpenAI API key depending on if we reach that part of the session or not. If yes, you can write in the, I think you can tell us and we will send you the key. Perfect. So let's get, again, very, very beginner oriented. We have a computer that we open a website or any application in. For example, imagine we want to open a messaging app, for example, WhatsApp. Either you open a mobile app if it is a mobile, or you go to chat.whatsapp.com or any other URL if it is a web app, and you open it. We know that it already connects to the internet and basically responds to you back. What is usually happening in the internet, actually, when you open, for example, the WhatsApp app and send a message, it is sent as something that you call a request to our backend, which is called also the application programming interface or API. The API is what receives our request. For example, here our request is to send a new message in WhatsApp. And then it communicates with our web server and a database, which, for example, includes all of the messages of a certain user or all of your conversation. And then it responds back to the web app. For example, we want to send a new message in WhatsApp. We type the message, send it. It is sent as a request to the API. The API adds the message to the database as a new record. So database consists, for example, of all of your messages that you have done in the past year or two. And then the API responds back to the web app or the mobile app, says, I sent the message. And then WhatsApp shows a check mark on the message, for example. So this is how it's done. We always model any kind of web app or any kind of mobile app also which communicates with web as these two parts. We usually call this part the front end, the part that users see, and we call that part the back end, the part that is basically in the back, as the name implies. And each time you do something in your mobile app or in your web app, a request is sent to the backend. The backend communicates with the database or with anything that it needs to do and sends a response back. So how could we use this for? These are used for a lot of tasks. If you want to develop a simple app, of course, you will use the dual architecture of front end and backend, which is pretty obvious. Otherwise, for other tasks, you may also need to consider doing an API. Imagine you are a researcher like in another department. I don't know if you are from IC or other departments in EPFL. I don't know, but imagine you are from another department, like, or at least in another major, like you are developing a code. For example, imagine you are in the civil engineering department. You have a script that would analyze the data based on certain inputs, and you want to share that script to everyone so that they can use it in their own systems, like in their own simulation software. You can put it, the Python code that you have, as a function in the backend API, and then tell everyone, okay, this is my API. If you want to request to my API, you should use this format, and I will respond back in this format. And then anyone can make a front end for your API. They just need to write the code here, and they can request your API and return the response back. So that's usually the way you can also share working code with others so that people can communicate with you. Actually, this has been done in practice. OpenAI, for example, does the exact same thing for GPT. When you want to use GPT in your own app, like you want to build an app that uses GPT, you just communicate with their API. They provide the API, you send them a request and they return back a response. Anytime you want to share a code, you're like this. Any questions? I think it should be fine and boring for those of you who know, but yeah. So again, okay, we talked about the dual model of the front end and the back end. The front end has the role of defining how the website appears in the browser, or also a mobile app, depending on the case. But here we are talking about the web apps. You describe how the website looks, and usually we do it with a certain format of HTML. How many of you know HTML? Okay, there are a bunch of you, so that's already quite fine. But for those of you also who don't know, I think there was a couple of people who didn't know. Basically, HTML is a format of describing what you want, what people have to see in the browser when they open your website. So for example, here, we wanted to have a big heading called welcome and then a text with the color of red. And we just described it in the HTML code. We said h1 welcome, which means the big header called welcome, and then a paragraph with color of red and the same thing. So this is how you describe the code. You don't, this is not the programming language, so you can't do calculations or do any kind of like a multiplication or any kind of calculation. It's just a description of what people see in the browser. And you can style it with the format of CSS, which we might get today, but this is not the focus of today. And also to write logic and behavior, if you need any kind of logic and behavior, for example, sending a request to API or things like that, usually write JavaScript code, which we'll get to it. For example, here is the example of JavaScript. We want to have a button in the interface that when you click on it, something would happen. Here, there's something more than an appearance, right? So what we do is to have a button, define it in HTML, button, click me, button. And then we have an onClick property. OnClick means if this button is clicked, what should happen? Here it says button onClick equals button click. Button click is the name of that function. We just define that function in the script. And this function is very simple. We just call the method alert, the function alert, welcome to the workshop. Alert is a predefined function that would provide an alert to the interface. I'm not going into deep details to just give you a grasp if you don't know, but this is quite all. So we usually make a front end with very basic building blocks, and there are a lot of frameworks that can help you make a good front end, but all of them ultimately convert to JavaScript in the end. However, we can't do whole web apps and whole apps application in the world with only front end, because all of the front end code runs locally on your device. For example, if WhatsApp only had a front end, you couldn't send messages to others because it would only happen on your device. You can only chat with yourself. If we want to have remote access to any data, share information, continue working on different devices, or make it interactive, anything like this, we should have a backend that we would send requests to. It would store in the database, and it would respond again back to us.
Just interrupt for 1 second. Yes. Is there anyone in the room that is vegan or that cannot eat gluten? So which one? Sorry. Vegan. Okay.
Thank you. I forgot to do this actually. Okay. So what the basically backend consists of? Backend basically just a piece of code running on a server that is always on and waiting for you to send a request. And whenever you send a request, we usually call it listening. It listens for incoming request. The source of request can be in any front end, like a mobile app or a browser. And then it returns back the response, request response. For example, in WhatsApp, we send a request and to retrieve the latest messages. In Twint, you can send a request to their server to send X francs from person A to person B. So each of these apps have their own front-end interface, right? There are different front-end interfaces, but there's also a server that handles data centrally, and all of the front-end interfaces in all of our cell phones, all of our smartphones, all of our devices connect to the same server and communicate with it in the form of the backend API. You can use most modern programming languages to build the backend. You can't use HTML, for example, because HTML is not something that you can do coding with. As I said, just an appearance description language, but like you can use Python, you can use Go, you can use even JavaScript. You can use many modern programming languages to build the backend. Here we are, we would get started with Python and the Flask framework, like very, very simple coding. And for this, we need a server, right? You need a server to host your backend. But actually, there are a lot of platforms that provide a server for free. One of them that you're going to use is Pythonanywhere, which I advise you to make an account in. I will show you the process. The goal is to, the goal of this workshop is to build a very, very simple to-do list app so that you can add the task that you want to do for the day. And we designed the backend API for it. So we designed an API that would have two interfaces. First, if you ask it, what are my tasks, it would return you the list of your task. And also you can add a task to your list. So there would be basically two functions in that API. And the front end is also the website that will show you the list of the task and also has a text field in which you can enter your new task and tap a button and it will send to the backend. Any questions? Perfect. So first, you can go to if you want to come along, you can go to Pythonanywhere to create an account. It's actually very, I love Pythonanywhere because it's usually very simple, very easy, and also free. And they have also reasonable pricing plans if you want to do advanced stuff. And also their support is pretty good. I have tried it in the past. So I would just suggest you to go to Pythonanywhere, create an account. You just click on the sign up on the top right, pythonanywhere.com. You just create a beginner account because we don't want to know, maybe you don't want to pay. You can just do the whole thing, the workshop with a beginner account. I think they will give you 500 and something megabytes of storage, which is totally fine. Register with your username. The username would be also the URL of your app, of your website in the free plan. So register with the username that you want to also be the website, and then confirm your email address. And yeah, so I can wait for some seconds until you do it. Those of you who want to follow. Yeah, so you just create a beginner account and you confirm your email. I have done this previously, so this is my username, LauzHack December 24th. So don't use the same username if otherwise it won't work. And it also provides you a very nice dashboard. And if you also get the paid plan, I think it also has a lot of plus and this kind of fancy stuff. When you created your account, okay, did you create your account here? All fine? You're doing? Okay, all fine. I mean, after you create, go to the web tab on the top of the page. There is a tab called web here. Click on this and add a new web app. We need to do it the first time that you create an account. So basically go to web tab. You click on add a new web app. You go next because there's nothing here. Here in the web framework, this workshop will work with Flask. Flask is usually the very, very simpler one because we want to do it totally beginner. But if you get more professional, you will like use Django or like more professional web frameworks. But for now, I think we can just do Flask. So just click on Flask here. And for the version, click on Python 3.10. Because I think that's usually the version that we always use, like the latest version available in the platform. And then click on next. And all right. Then it will create the web app for you after some seconds. It will take a while usually to create the web app, but after that it would load automatically. Perfect. So who was able to create the web app until now? Some of you. Others. Perfect. Okay. I can also wait some seconds for the rest. So it basically tells you here all done. How could I hide this thing? Hide floating. Okay. It tells you all done. Your web app is now set up. And you have, again, the web interface here. There is a button here that you can tap to reload. Whenever you change something in your code, you should tap this. And there's also the free plan only keeps your website for 3 months. So if you want to extend it, you should click on the yellow tab. But for this workshop, it's all fine. So you don't need to do it. Cool. So with that said, now we want to get to coding, which is the exciting part here. So let's just do it. When you created your web app, you go to the Files tab in the top here, Files. This is a file system of your server. So there are a bunch of files like git config profile. You don't need to necessarily change them, but this folder is important for us. This is a my site folder, which the main content of your website is included here. So you just open this folder, this directory, and there's already a file for you, flask.app.py. This Python file is the main entry file of your app. So you can, in the complex project, yeah, you can easily do in multiple files and do many kinds of such fancy stuff. But here, for simplicity, we will write all our code in the same file. You just click on it and you have this here. I don't know if it's big or not. Maybe I should increase the size. It's perfect. Okay. So this is as it says in the comments, surprise, surprise. It's a very simple Flask Hello World app for you to get started with. So what do we have here? They just imported Flask. This is the initialization code that you always write. And here they defined a route. What is a route? This says that if they go to your website and they type nothing after the slash, so there's just a slash, means they just go to your website, this function would be executed. So for example, here you can have basically in the web tab, you have the link of the website. So when I click on it, it said hello from Flask, because when I clicked on the website, it's nothing here. There's no slash or nothing after the slash here. So it matches this line. It means that there's nothing after the slash. So it means that this is your normal, the main homepage of your website. Whenever I go to the main homepage of the website, this function below this line would be executed. And this function returns hello from Flask. So this is returned to the front end, and I just see this text in my browser. Any questions? All right. Again, sorry for those who are bored by this, but yeah. So what if I change? For example, I can change here to something else, right? I write test. Then I save the file. And always remember to reload it. Each time that you change your code, you should tap on this green button to reload it, because otherwise it would not apply your changes. Cool. So here, when I open my website again, it says not found. When I reload my website again, because there is nothing matched to this pattern, to this one slash pattern. However, if I go to /test, it should tell me hello from Flask. So I can just test, and it will work. So it maps what you type in the browser. Basically, it would map it with your code. It is mapped here, and it would run this function. Any questions? I think it's easy, right? You might think it's too much if we return all of the website content in the functions. And you are actually true. You're totally right, because if we usually a web page has a lot of content, and if you just return it here, it would be a very long string with everything. So there is also a useful function in Flask that would help you return an already made HTML file. Let's do it. So we go here, we go to the Files tab. I want to create an HTML web page so that it's shown to the user. I go here, make a directory next to my Python file called templates. Basically, that's the name, right? I just make this directory. Templates are the folder that you put the HTML files of your website in. Then I create a new file here, for example, test.html. Oops. Yeah, it's fine. Test.html. And then I write something here. For example, I write, hello, I am parser. I want to make parser bold. In HTML, the way to do make something bold is to basically add B or a strong, maybe a strong is better, to add a strong tags around the name that you want to make it bold. So this means start bolding, this means end bolding the text. So this would return hello, I am parser, but parser would be bold. So I just save this file. Then I return back to my own code. And here, what I want to do is to return my HTML file. So I just do render template, and the file was named test.html, if I remember correctly. And we also have to import the render template function in the top of the file. So what this does is that it's when this function is executed, it would look at the test.html file and would just return that file to the front end, which is what we want to do now. So I just go here, I relaunch the website by clicking on the green button. And then I refresh the page. I don't do the test here. I just do it here. And you can see hello, I'm Parsa, and Parsa is bold, which means that the HTML file is successfully loaded. Any questions? Right. Cool. So let's get back here. We have also some other some other nice things to show here. I want to now show you how to interact with the real API, because you don't always do via browser, because the browser works for simple things, but it's better that you always have the API called in an organized manner. So I told you to download Postman or other equivalent apps. I assume you have already downloaded if you want to follow. I usually use Bruno. The difference, I'm now using Bruno. So what Bruno does, when you open the Bruno interface, you can click here and create a collection. You can do similarly in Postman, and basically create an API call so that you can invoke your API. You can send requests to your API directly from this interface. It shows a very nice interface, like with very color formatted of the output and everything. So it's actually very useful if you want to use it. Yeah, so I just create a collection. It's also similar in Postman. You just have a button to create a collection. If you have any questions, you can ask the staff people here. Just create a collection. I call it LauzHack Workshop. And I put it maybe my documents. Perfect. Then I add a new request here. I call it hello. Okay. So I now want to show you something very cool. There are actually different types of requests that we can send. What we already saw is we call it a GET request. GET request is the default request in APIs. Is usually mostly used to read data or get the web interface that you want to show on the front end. There are other types of requests that have different meanings. I won't go very deep into them, but just to show you an example, another famous example of HTTP methods is POST. So what I do is that I write app.route. For example, I want an API called say hello, and I specify the method as POST. So there are a range of different methods that I will show to you. But and you can specify also the method in Postman or Bruno or any other app you use. So usually there is a button here. You can use the method. It can be get, post, put, delete, patch, options, and head. These are the methods that are supported. Get is usually mostly for reading data. Post is mostly used for inserting data, like sending a new message, for example. Put or patch is mostly used for updating, editing, or such task. And for example, delete is also used for deleting data. Like if you want to delete a message in your chat application, you can send a delete request, something like that. You don't necessarily need to do them. You can do everything in post or everything in get, but it's usually better organized if you do them in the certain types. So there are a set of types that basically is available for you. Here, for example, I specify my method as post, right? And then define the function, say hello. And here I just return hello. When I relaunch this app, that I will do now, if I go to the say hello path, so let me just copy my URL and post it in Bruno or Postman. I specify the method as post, and I go to the say hello route. I don't know if you can see it clearly. Maybe I can zoom. Yes. So I go to say hello, and I set as post. And then we can tap on run or execute or the arrow here, and you can see the output here. This would be really helpful because you can create a lot of requests and organize them in different collections, and it would be really useful for you in the long run to be able to organize your API calls. This is one of the things that people usually, I've seen a lot of people actually use it, so I think that's a good idea so that you also know. Any questions here? So if we send as get, it won't work. We can try. Like we specify as post, right? So if we send a get, method not allowed, right? Because the method is not the same. So I will again change it to post, and post works, so I change it. Questions? All right. Perfect. Was it boring until now or fine? Yes, fine. Okay, of course. So, perfect. Let's get back to here. Where are my slides actually? Okay. So what I wanted to show, there are different HTTP methods, as I said, and they have different meanings, but you don't need to necessarily do their meanings. And another thing that I want to discuss is the error codes. Imagine some error happens in your software. You can return an error code to the front end or to the app so that you can show a relevant code in your you can see a relevant code in your interface. There are a certain set of HTTP status codes that you can use. Usually those that start with 200, the code that start with 200 means everything has been done successfully. For example, 200 means request is done, okay. 200.01 means something is created, and anything that is successful. 200.01 is actually used a lot. When your request like creates a new message or adds a new message, you can return 200.01. But there are also error codes. For example, everything starts with 4 and 5 are usually errors, and you capture them in your tool. So you can check in your front end if the server returns an error, you can show a message to the user, some error happened, please try again. For example, 400 is bad request, 401 unauthorized, 404, 404 is a very famous one, which is not found. So if they go to a they go to open a URL that is you have not supported, you can return this. Also, 500 is pretty used a lot, which means that there has been some internal error happened in the server, and they can't answer your request. Also, there is a nice website. You can see they are modeling it with different shapes of cats, the different codes. So maybe you can open it. It's quite nice. http.cat. So that's it. There are different codes, and you can return them in your backend code. How would you do it? It's pretty simple. You just add a comma and specify your code. For example, I want to add a return 400 here. Imagine some, or maybe 500. Imagine some internal error happened, and I want to return 500. You just save it and reload. So what I did is very simple. I just added a comma after our return value and added the error code. And then if I launch my basically API here again you see the hello, but here you see the error as well. Like it's a 500 internal server error because we returned the code 500. And in practice, you should in your mobile app code or your web app code, as you do, you should check for these codes and show a relevant error message to the user in, for example, in their language, because 500 is general for everyone. But imagine your app is in German or is in French, you should show the relevant language, show an error in the relevant language. Questions? All right. At least know some of the code. I think 201 is very useful to know. 500 is useful to know on top of your head. So yeah. Okay. Let's go. But you may think this is very preliminary, because it can only invoke a function and it will return a value. Why it is useful if we can't pass any value to the function? So now we want to see how the API can also get values from users. Imagine you have had a very fancy code that divides two numbers. I mean, this is a very simple code, but imagine you can do anything, right? You have a very heavy calculation and you want to provide an API for that. Here we are doing a very simple thing, dividing two numbers. Imagine you have a function that divides two numbers and you want to put it as an API so that other people in the world can request to your API and get a response back. So let's design that API ourselves. We write app.route. Again, the same. Imagine I call my API divide two numbers. And imagine it's also post, but it can be any method. So I'm not very keen on just having a post here, but it can be anything. Then def divide two numbers. So the two numbers, we need two inputs, right? So we need to get the two inputs from the user. How we do it is with a certain function called request, with a certain object called request. So we say number one equals to, imagine it's a float number, float of request dot args. It means the arguments of the request, and we say number one. What does this line mean? Might be a bit complex. This line, I mean, it's not complex, but anyways, this line means that when I want to send the value, I specify it with the name number one, and send it to the API. And then here, the value of number one would be what I sent from the front end. So this is the way that you can communicate between your front end and back end. If you want to send something from front end to back end, you use the request.args. I do the same thing for number two, which is pretty standard. And then I can check if number two is equal to 0, I return false, like success false. And here I want to do also something fancy. I want to return a JSON object. How many of you know JSON objects? Okay, a lot of you, that's fine. But for those of you who didn't raise your hands, JSON objects are similar to Python dictionaries. So I want to just return the dictionary in another way. For example, success would be false, and the result would be 0. Like if the second number is false, then it doesn't make sense, right? And I also can return the error code, for example, 500, because the second number was 0. But else, I return the true division. So I return success true, and result would be number 1 divided by number 2. And I return a valid code. For example, I return 200, which means okay. Or 201 is created, but it does not make sense here. So yeah, you saw here, we specified, actually there are error messages because I didn't import enough stuff. So I should import request and JSONify, like the one. JSONify basically is a function that converts a Python dictionary to the JSON format. It's very simple. So that's it. And you can easily imagine that you can integrate a very, very complex computational problem that you have with just this. So here you get the values input from the front end. You just do your fancy computation by calling a Python function and you return the result back. That's how you design an API. Very, very straightforward. So this divides the two numbers. Then you can add the parameters here. For example, I add number 1 is like 30, and the number 2 is like 5, and then I run it, and the result is 6 and success is true. But if the second number is 0, then we have an internal server error here, and the result is 0 and success is false. So it works as intended. Any questions? All right. Let's get to maybe a bit more exciting parts. So you know how to make an API, basically. Basically, everything is more complex version of this. Now we want to go into the basically saving the task in the database. Adding basically user wants to give us task and we want to save them in the database. So we just go to create a database so that we can store what the user is sending to us. Making a database in Pythonanywhere is also very easy. You just go to the database tab here, right? You have to initialize your database the first time. You just enter a password. You need to remember this password for later. For example, I enter something. You enter a password and you tap on initialize. It will take a bit. So what it does is that it makes us a database engine, an access to a database engine that we can use in order to save our data. Because until now, what we saw, we didn't save any data, right? We just got responses from the user and returned them back. Now we want to save them so that like if the server turns off or if later, basically for the future, it would stay like that. So this is the task that we want to do now. As you can see, I created my database with a password, and it also gives me 2 addresses that we'll use later. And we now, when we initialized the database, we can create our own database here. For example, I create a database named to-dos. I want to store my to-do tasks here in the database. So I just write here and tap on create. Everyone was able to follow, right? And if you have, just raise your hand if there is any problem. So you just create the database name here. Perfect. And it's created here. So you can see the database here. We can even interact with this database by just clicking on this link. Let's do it. So this is the interface, the console interface of the database, which we can use to interact with it. It takes usually a bit long to load, starting encrypted connection. So let's wait. Yeah, it's usually pretty slow, actually. Not this slow. I don't know what's happening. Until it's getting loaded. So here, the idea of this interface is that you can interact with your database. You can see what's in the database. You can add new entries to the database. You can delete, and basically you can do anything. And then we also add the relevant functions in the API that we can interact with the database. Oh, this doesn't work for some reason. Okay, this was unexpected. Let's open the link again. Oh, it worked this time. Okay. Loading console, preparing it. Okay, perfect. It's loading. So to interact with the database, we use a language called SQL. How many of you know SQL? Okay, a lot of you. I mean, shouldn't have come to this workshop. It's pretty easy. But yeah, so we just create a table. For those of you who didn't know, because there were some hands that you didn't raise your hands. To create a data, to work with the database, we need to create a table. We call it a table in which you add your entries. For example, here we want a table of all to-do nodes in which we add our to-do nodes there. Each node can have a title, can have a content or thing like this. For example, we can have, say, create table to-do nodes. This is the syntax. You say create table, the name of your table, and then you should specify the fields that your table would have. Usually all tables should have a unique ID. Like each row should have a unique ID, like a normal table, like in Excel or anything. So we have an ID of type int, integer. And we also say it is an auto increment field. Auto increment means it automatically increments. You don't need to care about which ID you should add next. Each time you add a new record, it would automatically make a new ID. Then we also have a username, which can be a text. We also have the title of the node that can be that is a text, and we also have the content of the node that can be a text. And finally, we should also specify what is the unique field here. I mean, we said ID is a unique field, but ID is just a name here. You could have said hello, parsa, anything instead of ID. You could have used your own name. So you just specify that ID is a unique field here, and we write primary key ID. This specifies to the engine that ID is a unique key here. That with each ID you can find a unique node. Any questions? Perfect. Query okay. So we now have our table. We can now insert something into the table. We can just say insert into the node. You specify what fields do you want to insert. For example, here I want to insert a username, a title, and content. And then you write the values. For example, my username is Parsa. Content is welcome. And content is, this is my content or anything, right? So you specify first the fields, then the keyword values, and then the list of your values. Query, okay, one row affected. It means it added one row to the database. And to read it, you can select a star. Select a star means select everything from your table. This command would return you everything in the table. And as you can see, our entry is added here. I think this is pretty easy for those of you who know SQL, but for those of you who didn't know, very simple. I just use very simple SQL commands, create table, insert to the nodes, and select something. And yeah, that's it. Perfect. So now that we have our database, we can quickly connect it to the Flask interface. There are a lot of ways you can do it. There are a lot of frameworks that help you with it. But you can also do it from scratch, which we are going to do here because of the educational purposes. But in practice, you can use a lot of ORMs or different frameworks to connect it. So we just go to our app. We import a mysql.connector. This function, this package would allow us to connect to our database with a very simple way. And then we should define our database. We define our database as mysql.connector.connect. So this would connect to the database that we have already made. It needs some information from us. It needs the host address. It needs it is the username, and it needs the password and the name of the database. We have specified all of them already. We just can go and copy. Let's see. Here, database host address. We just copy this. Perfect. And we just paste it as the host that we have here. All right. Username is also written here. We just copy it and paste it here. Password. This is the password that you initialize the database with. And I added a very, very secret password, as you can see here. And finally, you also mentioned the database. You can also copy the name of the database from here. Basically, everything is in this page except the password that you specified yourself. Database also here. Perfect. So I think we mentioned everything. And finally, there is another step. To interact with the database, you define a cursor object. So cursor object is the object you use for executing an SQL command, executing a command such as insert, delete, select, executing a command on your database. So I just do it very simple, db.cursor. This will return me the cursor object. This object can be later used to interact with my database. Let's do it. Let's add a function to add a new node. For example, imagine I want to do in my to-do list app, I want to add a new node. App.road, add a node. Perfect. And I add a post method, for example, but you can do any method that you like. Right? Def add node. So this is my function. What I want for a node, I want a username. So username is str of request.args username. Very, very cool. I also want the title and content. Like these are the things that the front end would send to me whenever it wants to add a node, right? So I just specify these fields, which are pretty standard, username, title, content. Then I specify my SQL command, the command that I want to run in the database. I want to insert something, right? So I just write the command insert into, this is the same thing that we wrote already, insert into to-do node. I think this was the name of the table, username and title and content. Values, here, you specify the values with %s. It means that it will replace those values with your real values. So I just write here at 3 placeholders. And then I specify the values like this. My real values are the 3 variables that I defined here. So it would be username, title, and content. You can basically reuse this template for any SQL interaction that you might want. So then what do I do? Cursor dot execute the SQL command with these values. So what this line does, first, it invokes the cursor object. It uses the execute function. Execute function executes our SQL command into the database. We pass the SQL command with the placeholders and then the values. It would replace these values with the placeholders and it would run the function for us. So that's how it does. And then when we execute the function, we should save the results. So we do db.commit. In practice, db.commit, if you run the commit function on the database, it would save the results so that the next time when you go to the database, you will have the results. Otherwise, it might not be saved. So please do this every time. But remember, execute function is used on the cursor object. Commit object is used on the database. So this is maybe a bit tricky, but that's how it goes. And finally, we return JSONify success equals true. And I think that's enough, right? And then we can have a 201, which means created, because we are creating a new node. All right, any questions here? Right? I think it was pretty clear. So we just added the code and let's quickly run it. Okay, perfect. So now if we have here our new function, it was called, I think, add node, right? Add node, username. I again add parser. I think the title, my title. What a fancy title, actually. And content, my content. I just run this function, and success is true. Because we use db.commit, it should have saved it into the database. So we can just check. Here we run this select again, and you can see my title and my content now added to the database. So it means our API is working correctly. Any questions? All right. Have you been following? Perfect. Let's quickly add another API to return all nodes of a user, and then we can just directly go to build the front end that will connect with it. Like again, saying it's pretty simple, but this is the main building block that you can use for basically everything. So we are adding a new function this time to return the nodes of a user. Because if you just add nodes, we can't get the list back. If you want to make a to-do list app, the app should first show you the nodes that are already there. And then whenever you want to add a new node, you can also do that as well. So it should be also both a function for adding and a function for seeing nodes. App.road, get nodes. I will call it get nodes maybe, right? And any method again, I mean, you can just use post maybe so that I wouldn't. I just use post because I don't want to change every time in the Postman or Bruno. But you can do whatever method you like. They have get nodes, and then here we need the username again because we want to get a note of a certain user, right? So I mean, in practice, you can also get a password and then check it. There's like a fancier way, but here it's a very simple app. It was just to authenticate the username. So we get the username. Then we want to run our SQL command. So our SQL command, what we want to show to the user. Select. Here, I don't say a star because I don't want to necessarily show the internal IDs or everything to the user. I just want to show to them their username, of course, title, and content. So username is anyway there because we need to do it. We need to filter by that username. And we also want to check title and content because we want to show them to the user. Select username, title, and content from the name of our table, which was to the node. Where Okay, what is where? Where is a condition statement in SQL. We want to only return nodes for this username. So we add a where clause to our command. We say where username equals, again, a placeholder. And then we we have the placeholder value here. So what it does is that if we run both of them together in the cursor, you already know here, cursor.execute, we just pass the SQL command and the values. This would run the command. Again, the same thing, like here, as we did here. We especially with SQL command, the values that would replace these placeholders, and then we execute it. Here, the same. SQL command, it has placeholder, then we define the values. It's only one value here, and then we execute it. But here, we don't want to commit. Commit is only done when we have to change something in the database and want to save it. Here, we haven't changed anything. We have executed a command that would give us a list, and we want to find the list. So here, we should use another method called fetch all to get the results. So results from database is equal to cursor.fetch all. This would return the results from the last command. Here, the last command is select. So it would return me basically the list of the entries in my database. So, and we now I want to convert it to a JSON format because it's now a list of tuples, Python tuples, and I want to convert it to a JSON format. So results, I mean, this is results final, for example, is an array. And for each item in results from DB, I just iterate over it. We have the username, title, and content equals item. So each item is a tuple, as I said. We can split it into the username, the title, and the content. And what I want to add is I want to add to the results final that append title equals title is title and content. So this would add all of the titles and content from my database in a list so that I can return it to the user. Basically, it's a list of Python dictionaries. Any questions? I think it's fine. And then I just return it. Return again like this. I returned the 200 here because we are not creating anything. It's just okay. Success true. And then, for example, notes are results final. I mean, in the real world, you should also have a try catch here to like catch exceptions. But here, I think it's very simple, and we just do this. Any questions here on how we wrote this function? All right. We can now test it while it is running. Everyone is up to progress. Those of you who didn't know, up to progress. Cool. Perfect. So let's do it. Let's go quickly to Bruno or Postman. Get nodes, and we don't need title and content. So we only need a username, and we send it, and it would give us the list in a dictionary format, JSON format, and we can easily parse it. We can easily extract it in our front end and show it to the user in a very fancy design of list. Perfect. Okay, now we are at it. We still have some time, which is pretty cool. Actually, I told them today to, I think we told them to for pizza to 7:45. So I think yeah, we have time. Perfect. Okay, very cool. So getting back to here, now we want to build a very simple front end, a web interface, because you can't release an API like this and expect many people to open Postman or Bruno or any other app and like enter the URL and figure out these things. You just want to release an app so that they can easily use. Like even if you're you're, for example, as I said, computational heavy serious calculation in like civil engineering or in mechanical engineering, you have found a script, you deploy it in an API. You also want to provide an interface for people who don't know how to play with APIs to be able to come and test your online code. So it's always useful to also have a front end for your code. And that's what we are going to do now. We are going to do, specifically for those of you who didn't know HTML, we are going to write a very, very simple HTML page to see how in practice it works. So if you remember, I had this test.html somewhere here, if I still have it. Yes. So I'll just replacing this file that I previously made. HTML websites have this kind of tags. We call it usually tag. It has an opening version and a closing version. And for example, you already saw the tag strong. Everything between opening and closing strong tag is rendered in bold. Or there are a lot of other tags in HTML, maybe hundreds of them, I don't know, that allow different styling or different behavioral changes in your app. So what we're going to do here, usually the standard is that all HTML apps start with a HTML tag, which is basically the wrapper for the whole document. And each document, we have a head and a body. This is usually the standard. So what is the head and body? Body is the main thing that you see in your interface. When people come to your app, the main thing that they see in the browser window is body. Head is anything extra. If you are referencing anything external, or maybe you are specifying the title that would come here, which is outside of your main window. All of these things usually go to head. For example, here we can add a title inside head. Title, my best app ever. So this is the title that we add into the head tag. Okay. And in body, we can make our own interface. For example, I want to add a header on the top saying welcome. Header, you use the tag h1 to do it. You don't need to memorize this tag necessarily. I mean, also GPT can help you, or Copilot, or you can just read manuals. It's pretty simple. So you just do it very simple. The best app ever. Like this is the header of my website. H1 means header, basically the first header. And then I want to add a text field to ask them to enter their username. So I just type enter your username. And then I want to here add a field for them to enter the username. So I just write input. Input is the tag for getting input from users, for getting any textual or numerical input from users. Here I want to get the username from the user. They type the username. So I just add an input. The type of the input is text because I want to get a text from the user. The text is actually the username. Sorry. Type is equal to text. And we specify an ID for the input so that we can later refer to it and we find the value. So each input should have an ID, and the ID here is just username. Here we don't have a closing tag for input because input is just one thing. It's just an input. It doesn't contain anything, so we just close it with this way. We add a slash here, and this means a tag that is only one tag. It's not an open tag and a close tag. You see here, body open, body close. H1 open, H1 close. But input doesn't have an open and close, so we just write all of it in the same line. Then we want to have a button. Button is just button, very simple. And when I want to click on it, I want to run the CNotes. I want to run the CNotes function. I want the CNotes function to be executed. And here the content of the button is CNotes. Pretty simple, right? So we just add the button. And I will define this function later. For now, I have not defined this function, but yeah. Okay, and then when they click CNote, I want them to see all of their notes. So I add another header here, all notes. And then we want to show the notes here. For now, I don't have any notes that to show. I want to do it in runtime. I want to get from the API. So I add an empty division in this page, which we call it with the tag division or division, I think. And we specify an ID, for example, all notes. And here I don't write anything here. I don't want anything to be there yet. I will change it in runtime whenever someone comes to, whenever the API response is back. And I will then add the notes here. So for now, I don't write anything here. Then I can make the part for adding a new note. So it's like new note. Enter the note title. And then the title is, again, input type of text. And ID, I can put any ID. For example, I just put it note title, right? And then the same thing for content. right? Very simple. Then I have another button to add a note. Any questions? All right. So those of you who didn't know HTML, this you see is pretty simple, right? We just define some tags and specify IDs and attributes to each tag. Basically, after a while of writing, you can easily do it without thinking. So it's not very difficult. Let's quickly run it to see. How does our fancy web app look like now? So this was our interface, right? I assume. And okay, it's running yet. Still running. Perfect. Oh, it's too big. But because I think I zoomed it, so this is the original size. So you see it's very ugly, but that's expected because you can't make a website necessarily beautiful with just HTML alone. HTML just for the define. I will get over the styling part later, but at least this works. So you can you see that all what you wrote is exactly rendered here. I added a header. Its header is to the big size, and then I added the text and had the text field and had the button, and everything is rendered here. Perfect. But now if I write my username here, nothing would work because the function does not exist yet, the function that we defined. So we can just add the functions. Any question until now? To add the function, we just add a script tag. Here we are writing the function in JavaScript code. And that's what you usually do when you want to define a new function, to run something. If you want to run a logic in the code, you use JavaScript. So we run a function, we add a function for denote and for add note. We want a function for both. These functions run asynchronously. By asynchronously, we mean that it takes time to these functions to run because they should send a request to the API and back. So the way that we define it, we write async function. Async function means a function that may not return immediately. It might take time to go to the server and then return back. So async function C notes. Perfect. Then I want to first get the username that the users have entered here. How do I do it? I write let username equals document.get element by ID username.value. What is this? So document is the object in JavaScript that refers to the basically whole document. There is a method called get element by ID. You pass an ID here, and it looks your whole code to find this ID. Where does this ID here? It's here. So basically, document.get element by ID returns us this input tag inside our code. And then we just get the value. The value of an input is basically what is written inside it. So here, the whole thing would be our username. And also remember the name, because there are several functions with similar names. It's like get element by ID, and ID also is not, the D is not capitalized. So that's usually a common mistake. The D is not capitalized. It's like a capital I and then D. Okay. Then we want to, okay, we have the username. Then I want to send this to the API. Let response, this is the response I want to get to the API. We use the word await. Await means wait until the response from the API comes. And then we call a method called fetch. Fetch in JavaScript is a method to call an API, literally. So what do we do in fetch? We write get nodes. We add a question mark. The question mark specifies that we want to now specify the parameters. And you remember there was one parameter in our code, and that was the username. And the way that we do it is we add new URL search params. I mean, there are several ways of doing it, but this is one of them. And then we specify the username here. So what does this do? It means that call the get nodes API, and then add a list of parameters. And here the only parameter is the username. These are the parameters that our backend expects from us. And then in another object, we specify the method. Method, I think it was post, right? Yeah, it was post. And then we do it, basically. So what this code does is whenever this code is run, it would first get the username, and then it would send a request to this API with the username and a method of post. And the code would wait until the response is back, and then it would continue. Now we want to convert it to a JSON format. As I told you, JSON is the equivalent of Python dictionaries in JavaScript. So let JSON equals await response.json. This line would basically convert the response that we got to JSON format. Perfect. Now we have an object. We have the object that we want. Basically, the object contains a list of nodes. Each of them have a title and a content. So I can just form the output text that I want to show. This is like very, very basic at this stage. Let output text equals nothing. Then I do a for, let I equals 0. I mean, this is a simple for loop, right? You already know. JSON.nodes.length, I++. Everyone knows this loop format, right? In Java, I think most of you have already know. Because in Python it's different. We get the item, which is JSON.nodes of I. If you remember, the object's name was nodes. It was success and nodes. And then we add to the output text the title, right? And then we can add, okay, there's a colon, like title, colon, a space, and then the content. Then we want to go to the next line. Next line, in normal programming, you would have used a /n. In HTML, you use BR. BR means line break. BR comes from break and has the meaning of a new line in any code that would be rendered in your HTML. So we use BR here. BR is basically new line here. Nothing very fancy. And then we want to show this output text into this element, into the all nodes element that we made here. So how do we do it? Again, we should get that element, document.get element by ID, all nodes. So this line would return this element for us. We want to change the inner HTML of that element to our new output text. And that's it. So what this code does is that first we get the response from the API, we form the output text, and then we write it into the inner HTML. Inner HTML means whatever is inside this. So anything here is called the inner HTML. It's originally empty. We write whatever we get inside the inner HTML here. Let's just run it and see. It should work. Hopefully. Any questions until now? All fine. Oh, you seem pretty fine. Cool. So I think perfect. So let's refresh. You should first refresh, by the way. I write parser, see notes. You can see my notes here. So it means that the API and the connection has worked. Perfect. There are many better ways to integrate the results of the API in the front-end user interface. Again, we just saw the very bare bones model. We never do like this in a real system. We always use a framework. You can use React, you can use Angular, you know, a lot of frameworks. But this is basically for educational purposes to see the very, very initial building blocks. Let's quickly also write the add node, if you want. It's pretty much very similar. I think function add node. So here we should have the username again, but we should also have the title and the content to add a node. These are just the ones that we have already defined. Like there's nothing specific here. Then I just copy paste here to save time. But here I send to add node. And in addition to username, I also send the title and the content. All right. And then here, I mean, I don't even need the JSON. I just need here. I just want to check the status. Maybe it's a good idea. We want to check the status code if we see like it's a success or fail. We can say like let a status equals response as a status. Here, the status variable is the same code, like 200, 401, 404, 500. So here, if a status equals 201, which was the correct code for creation, alert success. Else, alert failed. Alert is just a simple function in JavaScript that shows an alert on the system. So let's just do it quickly to see if it works. Something is wrong? No, nothing is wrong. Perfect. I hope it should work. So I didn't do anything specific here. I just do the same function, but add a title and content, and also check for the status to see if the node is added correctly or not. If not, we can show a failure response to the user. So we just go here. Again, username is parser. So my nodes are these two already. Node title, this is title 3, content 3. Add the node. You see the alert success. It means the node is added. And if I click on see nodes again, you see that my new node is added here. So it means that all the connection works perfectly. Any questions? All right, cool, perfect. So what's the next step? The front end is very ugly. I literally in this workshop, the goal is to give you a glimpse of everything, right? So I don't want to get deep into everything, but get a glimpse of everything that some of you might know, some of you because of the stats of raising hands, some of you also don't know. So get a glimpse of everything. Now the front end is very ugly. I at least hate it. No one will use such an app. So what to do? We want to make it beautiful, right? There are a lot of tricks that we can make it beautiful. For example, you can do the same HTML code, but change the styling in a way that it can look like this. Basically, those are the same HTML code, but you just change the styling. How many of you know CSS here? Okay, a bunch of you, but there are more people who don't know. So I will also cover it. CSS, or cascading style sheet, is a way of styling your web pages. So you define already your tags and elements, then you define a style. A style can be background, could be a spacing, could be rounded corners, could be colors, could be shadows and everything. So we can define everything as a style in our code. Let's do it. We want to convert this to something like that. So it's maybe pretty ambitious, but you will see it's pretty simple. So let's do it. First of all, let's start from the main body, like the background of the system. I go here to my HTML file. I add a new tag here called style. In practice, usually do it in a separate file, but here I want to make it more simple, so I just define the style here. We define the styling of the web page in the style tag. First of all, I want to define the style of my body. So I just type body and open the brackets or anything like that. I want to do a fancy background. You can do here just specify maybe a simple color, for example, red, green, blue, or anything. Or you can also be very, very stylish. For example, I want to go super stylish here. I want to do a linear gradient, which means that basically the color changes from right to left. Linear gradient to right, which means that it's left to right, and two colors. For example, I think the same color that I use, I have the note here. This is color for the interface you saw. It is like DAD 299 and B0DAB9. In practice, you will usually get it from the designer. Or you can also play with different color codes. So these are the color codes if you don't know. This is a number in base 16, which is basically the first two digits refer to the amount of redness, the second to amount of green, and the third to the amount of blue in the color. And of the combination of this, you can make any color that you want. So I just came up with two sample colors here. And also I want to center everything. To center everything, we use a trick called flex display. So I say my display is flexed, which means that I can change the appearance. And I want everything to be rendered vertically, not horizontally. So I do flex direction equal to column. It means that it renders everything from top to bottom. And I can align everything to center. You see, they are usually very like English terms. You just write the, you should just, after a while, you will remember the attributes that you want to use, and you just write them, and then you see how it works in practice. So here, what I did is I changed the background, I changed the display, and I aligned all of them to center. Let's see how it looks. Pretty excited to see. Because I think it's still ugly, but maybe less ugly with, I hope. Let's see. Oh yeah, a bit less ugly. So at least the thing that we did worked. So we changed the background, as you can see, and also we made it the center, line item center, so that everything is centered. Now let's start to improve the button, because the button is also a bit ugly in my opinion, and also the font. Maybe font, we can use something called Arial or some other font. Let's just do it. Font family, like Arial or any other font that you want to use. I won't rebuild every time, but you can imagine what would change. Let's also change the button. Currently, the button is very small and also not a very good color. So I want to change both. First, I can add a spacing around the button to make it a bit bigger by using padding. For example, I add like 15 pixels of padding around the button, which means that it will basically make the button bigger. I can change the background color, like to, for example, here, something like this. I can change the color of the text on the button. This is currently black. If you remember here, it's currently black. For example, I want to make it white. So basically white. And I want to also make make the button rounded, like rounded corners. So what I do, first of all, I will remove the current border that the button has, and then I will have a radius of 10 pixels. What does this mean? It means that the borders of the button are circular. It's not rectangular. And we add a radius. So it makes the button a rounded corner. And I also want to, here, if you see my button, if I move my cursor on top of button, it doesn't change to a specific type that tells me that this button can be clicked. So I want to change the cursor to these kind of hands if it goes over the button. I can easily also do it with cursor pointer. I'm just showing you like different possibilities that you can do with CSS, and then you can explore it in more details and see you can do a lot of things like that. Maybe also increase the font size a bit. Like you can use a percentage, it means relative to its original amount. For example, this means 10% more than the original amount, 110%. And I also want to do, if I hovered over the button, I want the color to change a bit. You know, when you go over button, even in the Pythonanywhere, you see, when I go over this button, the hover changes a bit, right? So I can just do it, button hover, and then change the background color. For example, to this color. Let's do it to see how it looks. I'm excited to see if it's now more beautiful. Like before and after pictures that you usually see, right? Let's see. Right, okay. So this is the old one. Okay, it looks a bit better. So we are improving, you see? This is the way that you can improve the interfaces. So now we have a button, but it's like, I think, too detached to the top. So maybe we can decrease the padding a bit and add the margin. You can do a lot of tricks. I won't go over all the details because I want to also show you something else, but you have the full code. I will release the full code that makes the interface that I made in the slide also, so you can see. But basically just playing with all of what we saw. I'm not using anything new. You just play with the background color, with the spacing, paddings and margins, with the radius, with the fonts, with font size, until you find the interface you want. This is very, very simple CSS. And you can, and like basically every website that you see ultimately is compiled to a CSS, the styling mostly. So, I mean, if also you write in the framework usually exports as a CSS file. If you usually look at the build files, you will usually see it. So in practice, the styling of the web as we know it is ruled by CSS. And this pattern is how you usually can style initial interface that you have with different colors, with different patterns to match what a user would like. Any questions? All right. I think we can go to the OpenAI part. Yes. So for this part, those of you who need, yeah. What I want to do, basically, yeah, this was an excuse. This is not very related to web development, but this was an excuse, and I think it's also useful for you if you want to like build an app to just use an already existing API, OpenAI API, to add intelligent feature to your app. And then with that, you can easily make a very cool app and win something in a hackathon or something, because that's usually the goal of the workshops, to get you started with building apps that you can use in hackathons, right? So after OpenAI has released the GPT model, that is very successful in providing summaries, in providing intelligent responses. You have, of course, all of you have used ChatGPT. Is there any of you that have not used ChatGPT, by the way? I mean, if I asked this question 2 years ago, it would be everyone, but now it's like, oh, if you don't use ChatGPT, you will fail your courses, I think. So yeah, in practice, everyone uses ChatGPT to learn, and it's very useful for learning, to be honest. I also use it every day, like use it to explain concept to you and to learn. So we want to integrate it into our tool to make it fancier. I want to use OpenAI API. OpenAI API is basically the API that OpenAI provides for using GPT to have a function that would summarize all of my notes. I literally want them, for example, imagine I have a set of notes and I want to have a button in my tool that would summarize all of them for me. Imagine you are making a to-do notes app, and there are a lot of to-do notes app in the world, but your differentiating feature is that with a tap of a button, you can see a summary of all of your to-dos in one paragraph and know what to do the day after. So imagine this is the feature that we want to add in our app. Any questions? I think you all got it. Let's go quickly do it. So first of all, this needs one of the reasons that I also try to use this is that OpenAI package is something external. So you have to install it. And for that, you should go to Pythonanywhere and go to the console tab. for installing any external package. And here you should, you can only have up to two consoles. Okay, we should close one of the database ones because in the free plan, we can only have two consoles here. So I close one of them, sorry. And then I start a new console. You click on Bash. Bash will basically open the terminal that you use to install packages. So you just open Bash. I went to the console tab and opened Bash. And here it would load the console for me. It's a full, you can basically access the full system here. It's like a instance of Linux, for example. And now I want to install OpenAI. The way that I do it is with the pip command. Pip command, if you don't know, actually we have a very cool workshop on the Python dev tips. They also cover pip next semester if you want to join, if you haven't. Pip is a tool for installing Python packages that are released by others. Here I want to install OpenAI package to be able to connect to GPT. So I say pip install OpenAI. Just wait a bit, and it would install it. For any kind of package, for example, if you need a certain package for your scientific, like civil engineering, you can use it and everything. Yeah. Click on Bash. Yeah, if you don't see Bash, you need to close one console because I think there is a limitation of the number of consoles you can have in the free plan. So I went to consoles here. Yeah, I mean, here there's Bash here, but if you have already opened two databases, then you can't do Bash unless you close one of them. So it worked successfully installed. I mean, there are some errors, but I don't think we care. So now we have the OpenAI package installed. With that said, we can now go to our tool and interact with the OpenAI API, and that's also pretty new to most of you, to how to integrate OpenAI into your code. This is not only useful for making backends, but in the future, if you are doing a research project that you want to research project in the domain of large language models, if you want to send something to GPT, you can just use the same code base and it will work. So let's just quickly do it. From OpenAI, import OpenAI. This is just, sorry, this the first OpenAI I think should be like this, yeah. No, sorry, the second one. I always make this mistake, so I always have a note for this. From OpenAI, import big OpenAI, and then you define the client, which would be equivalent to OpenAI API key equals your key. You write your key here. I don't have a key at the moment, but you can write the code that you receive if you want. Then, so this would initialize your OpenAI with the API key that you received. The key is necessary because OpenAI needs to know who you are so that it can bill you, and you need to pay the money. So we can have a function, ask GPT to summarize, and we pass the notes. So as you already know from GPT, GPT works by you should ask a question in text, and it will answer you back in text. So notes here is an array, is a list. We need to convert it to a string, right? So we just initialize a string, user message equal nothing, and then for each note in notes, we just add user message plus equals title. I'm just forming the message that we will send to GPT, right? Title plus note title plus a new line. Content here, the new line is not BR, by the way, because we are interacting with OpenAI, and it's the normal \n we always had. Content plus node content. Sorry. Then we can have like something like this that splits between nodes. And then we want to send it to the API, but we should also add something. Please summarize this message, right? In GPT, you don't only just send all of your messages and expect it to do magic, but you ask it, please summarize these messages. So my system message is, please summarize the notes of the user, right? This would, OpenAI would work. It's perfect. Then we run this function, client.chat.completions.create. This is the function that would integrate with ChatGPT and ask questions from it. So we should first specify here the model. Model is which GPT version we are working with. For example, it can be GPT 3.5, GPT-4. You already know GPT version, right? If you see in the OpenAI interface in ChatGPT, you can use it. For example, here I use GPT-4o, which is the new model, the almost new model. And then I put the messages The messages are in this format: role and content. Each message has a role and a content. The first message usually has the role of a system, and the content is the system message, of course. Please summarize the notes of the user. Pretty simple, right? And then we have a content as well. Sorry, we have a user message, which means the message that the user is writing. And then here the content is also user message. So I didn't do anything specific here. We just passed the messages to OpenAI with this format. This is the standard format that OpenAI expects from you. All right. What I missed here? I think I missed a call sign here, right? You also specify temperature. How many of you know about temperature in GPT? Okay, not a lot of you again. Temperature is a measure of how much randomness or creativity you want in the output of GPT. You don't use it in chatgpt.com, in ChatGPT website, normally, but you can specify in your code. The lower the temperature is, the more concrete the output is, and it's less creative. It's very rigid and strict. If you increase the temperature, it would increase the creativeness. Like, for example, if you want to come up with a very fancy story, you can increase the temperature. It would increase the randomness in a sense. For more details, I mean, you can, I don't want to again advertise, but we had this summer bootcamp, which we also went over NLP and all of these large language models and how they work. And we also, as I said in the beginning, we would also likely have another one in the spring break, between basically, not the spring break, sorry, the break between the two semesters. So if you want to join, you can join, and that would be pretty cool to know how GPT works. But here we just put a normal temperature, for example, 0.5. You don't need to care about what temperature exactly means, but it is a measure of how the model would respond. And then you just return. By the way, this response should be outside of the, yeah. You just return response dot choices 0, which means the first response that will return dot message dot content. That's it. This should work. I will not run it because I don't have API key now, and we are also near the end of the time, but you can run it yourself. And this is also useful not only for backend, I just gave it as a general example. This is how you interact with OpenAI API. If you have a research project in which you want to send all requests to OpenAI, you just do this. Very simple. You just form the user message system message, call client.chat.completion.create, specify role of system user, specify a temperature, and that's it. Whenever you call this, it would send a request to GPT. It would usually take some time. It's not very long for GPT-4o. It's like maybe 5 minutes. Sorry, 5 seconds. Not 5 minutes, of course. It's like 5 seconds, but it will return you super fast. It depends on the model. You can use different models and get different results. So that may be also useful for you if you want to do any kind of research or project that uses GPT, and you can easily enable intelligent support in your app. Any questions? If it's all right, maybe we can get to the quiz so that I won't keep you from pizza. Pizza is there, right? I think it's fine. I mean, we can even maybe try it, but I need an API key. Thank you. Yeah. Telegram maybe. Sorry, this is the. Thank you. I mean, those of you who run it, were you able to run it? Or no? Let me know. How does this sharing work? Share to my Mac. The name is not here. Parsas MacBook Pro. Okay. Perfect. This code later.
Yeah.
This record later.
So yeah, I'll rebuild those keys tomorrow morning. So if you will turn around, you have tomorrow morning. Obviously, don't do any requests, please. Cost money. Yeah.
And we can just have a very quick API, and then we will have a quiz and then pizza. So after that road, summarize notes. I mean, at this stage, it is easy, right? Summarize notes. We again specify the methods. Perfect. Def summarize notes. And then here we get the username. Again, the username is str request dot args. Sorry, username. So do you just get the username? We again run the SQL command. Maybe I can just copy it. It's easier. Right? Where username equals, and then values, the cursor dot execute, results from DB, cursor dot fetch all. Then we have all of our nodes for item in results from DB. I'm just doing the same thing, right? I'm just iterating in the loop. Username, title, content equals item. Then we add it to nodes, like title, content. Pretty simple. Then we call that function. Response equals ask GPT to summarize nodes and return. You can just return the response for now. Or you can return the JSON if you want it faster, to be fancier. Okay, any questions on the code that I wrote? I think it's fine, right? We just use the same function of retrieving the nodes, and then I just ask GPT to summarize all the nodes. Let's see if it works. So the function is called summarize nodes. What's the problem here? Undefined name app. Oh, yes, I should have pasted it here below the definition of the app. So just remember, road should be below the definition of the app. Thanks to Pythonanywhere for informing me about this. I will just run the code again. Cool. I think it's running. Summarize nodes. So this was our function. Oof, something's wrong. Let's see what's wrong. So if you have an internal server error, you can find the error logs by going here. Log files, error log. App is not defined. I mean, yeah, it is not defined. I think it was the old error. Huh? Okay. Maybe did I save the file? I saved it. Let's run again. I hope the error would be solved. So we just reload. Go. Perfect. Try. Oops. So we should see. We go to error log again. Oh, invalid API key. I don't know. But no worries. I mean, it should work. It seems that it means that our code is working literally because it says invalid API key. It means that the code is working. So if I don't want to take more time, but if you replace the API key with the correct API key, it should work.
Does anyone have an error with the API key as well?
I mean, it's fine. I mean, because if it gets to this point, it means the code is working literally. Yeah, just the API key is not working. So yeah, it will provide you a summary if you use the correct API key. Yeah. And you also saw where I saw the errors, right? This is also very nice. You can always see the errors by going here, log files, error log. This is also very useful for your debugging. Perfect. Any questions? If not, we can get to a quiz and we have prizes for the first three.